My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a memorial artisan. My shop, the Sentinel House, is tucked away on a cobblestone street in the old harbor district of Port Sterling. The craft has been in my family for generations, but by the time it got to me, it had lost its appeal. Teslas, glass-walled condos, and whatever's trending on TikTok. That's what the people of Port Sterling want now. The things I make, life-sized effigies and memorial figures, are only remembered when it's time for a funeral. A steady plume of sandalwood incense always burns in the shop, a necessity to cut through the smells of paper pulp and curing ink. The scent clings to me, a permanent part of my clothes, mingled with the dry, crisp aroma of old paper. The first time Ava Monroe came to see me, she covered her nose, complaining that the smell was suffocating. She's the only daughter of Marcus Monroe, head of the Port Sterling Commerce Board. Ivy League education, a year spent finding herself in Europe. Our engagement is the biggest joke in the city. Everyone says some broke artisan from the wrong side of the tracks like me must have had his ancestors smiling on him to marry into the Monroe dynasty. I get why they say it. I'm not the picture of health, pale year-round, looking like a strong gust of wind could knock me over. I run a struggling business and have nothing to my name but this strange, antiquated skill. And Ava? Ava is beautiful, cosmopolitan, the poster child for the modern woman you see featured in glossy magazines. But the Monroes were the ones who proposed the marriage. Marcus Monroe came to my shop himself, claiming he admired my quiet diligence and masterful craftsmanship. I just smiled and said nothing. A man who clawed his way up from the docks to rule the city's commerce. He was impressed by my humble trade. He wanted the land the Sentinel House sits on. He wanted the secrets hidden within its walls. I knew in my gut, but I said yes, because when Ava looked at me back then, her eyes shone. They were like the fireflies in the courtyard behind my shop on a summer night. I let myself believe that light was real. Today, Ava came again. She carried a chic little box from that new patisserie downtown. Ethan, you have to try this. It's fresh from the oven. She smiled, placing the cake on my workbench. She picked up an unfinished figure, a tragedienne with eyes yet to be painted, and examined it with feigned curiosity. I didn't touch the cake. My sense of smell is sharper than a bloodhound's, especially in this old shop, steeped as it is in 100 different scents. Any aroma that doesn't belong is as glaring as a splash of white paint on black canvas. Ava had a strange scent on her. It wasn't her usual gardenia perfume. It wasn't the sweet fragrance of the cake. It was subtle but persistent, something like a hospital, mixed with the tang of damp earth and the faintest hint of rust. What's wrong? Don't you like it? She noticed my hesitation and moved to take my arm. I shifted my body instinctively, avoiding her touch. Her hand froze in midair, the smile on her face faltering for a second. No, it's not that. My hands are covered in ink. I'd ruin your dress. I offered the excuse and picked up my brush, returning to the face of the figure in my hands. It was a tragedienne, her eyes needing to be long and narrow, the corners of her mouth turned up just so, hinting at a secret, sorrowful smile. It takes precision, a steady hand, a calm heart. But today my hand was trembling slightly. The strange scent on Ava reminded me of something awful. When I was a boy, my grandfather had to dispose of a stray cat that died of sickness in our courtyard. The air had that same smell. He told me it was the smell of death beginning to rot. How could a living, breathing person carry such a scent? Ethan, what are you thinking about? She leaned in close, her warm breath on my ear. The strange odor intensified. I could even tell it wasn't coming from her clothes, but seeping from her skin, from within her very body. I was just thinking about what color to paint her lips. I answered, not looking up. My hand steadied. I dipped the brush in crimson ink and drew a line across the figure's pale face. A smear of brilliant red as blood. You're always tinkering with these morbid things, Ava said, a note of disgust in her voice she didn't even try to hide. After we're married, let's sell this place. We could open a coffee shop or an art gallery. Anything would be better than this. I didn't answer. She'd said things like that before, and I dismissed them as casual complaints. But today, hearing those words combined with that smell, a chill ran down my spine. She wasn't suggesting. She was informing me. Ava, have you been getting enough sleep lately? I put down my brush and turned to face her. Her face, even in the dim light of the shop, was still beautiful. But deep in her eyes, I saw a flicker of exhaustion and anxiety. "I'm fine. Never better," she said, her gaze shifting away as she reached for the cake. "You should eat this before the frosting melts." I looked at the slice she offered me, the fork laden with white cream. Shrouded in that strange odor, the sweet dessert looked less like a treat and more like a sacrificial offering. I took it from her, but I didn't eat it. Instead, I placed it in front of the tragedian figure, whose lips I had just painted. "She's hungry, too. Let her have the first bite," I said, and gave Ava a small, knowing smile. In that instant, her face went as white as the vellum on my workbench. Ava left in a hurry, taking the uneaten cake and a look of pure confusion with her. She couldn't understand why I'd done that. An effigy couldn't be hungry. After she was gone, I locked up the shop. I placed the tragedian in a large armchair in the center of the main room, with the cake set on a small table before it. I didn't turn on the lights. Moonlight filtered through the latticed windows, casting a cold, silver glow on everything. The sentinel sat quietly, its crimson lips looking almost sinister in the pale light. The cream on the cake was slowly melting, collapsing into a puddle. The air, besides the sandalwood, still held the strange scent Ava had brought with her. I sat on a small stool nearby, watching. The sentinels in my shop aren't like the ones my grandfather or my father made. They have an awareness, a spirit. It's the Cole family secret, passed from father to son, never to be shared with an outsider. I closed my eyes, and the subtle sounds of the shop grew louder in my mind. The wind whistling over the eaves, a mouse scurrying across the rafters, and the whisper-thin rustle of stiff paper. It was the sound of 1,000 pages turning in the dark. I knew they were waking. I could feel their gazes on me, coming from every corner of the shop. The figures on the shelves, the ones hanging on the walls, those stored in the back room, they were all watching me, waiting for my command. "Tell me what you sensed on her," I said softly, as if talking to myself. A cold draft swept through the room from nowhere. The head of the tragedian in the armchair slowly, unnervingly, turned to face me. It had no eyes, only two dark, hollow sockets, but they were fixed right on me. The cream on the cake before it had completely melted into the plate. Floating on the surface of the white liquid was a faint, almost invisible wisp of black smoke. The smoke coiled and twisted, forming a blurry, distorted face. It was Ava's face, but this version held no smile, only a dead, vacant expression. Poison. A razor-thin voice, seeming to come from everywhere at once, slid into my ear. It was the tragedian speaking. Its painted lips didn't move, but the word was perfectly clear. My heart sank, just as I suspected. That strange smell was the residue of a toxin. It had been mixed with some other rare herbs to mask its primary scent, which was why it was so peculiar. "What kind of poison?" I asked. "A slow-acting neurotoxin. It targets the brain. After 49 days, the victim becomes docile, suggestible. They'll answer any question, do anything they're told." The voice continued. "The scent on her is from handling the ingredients. The compound is nearly complete. 49 days. My wedding to Ava was scheduled for 49 days from now. What a vicious, brilliant move. They'd use the engagement to keep me complacent while secretly poisoning me. By our wedding day, the toxin would have taken full effect, and I'd be a puppet they could control. Then the Sentinel House and all its whispered-about secrets would fall right into their hands. Marcus Monroe, a cunning old fox indeed, but he seriously underestimated me, and he seriously underestimated the Sentinel House. Was she alone in this? I asked. The cold wind grew stronger. Beside the smoky face of Ava, another face began to form. A man's. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, his hair slicked back with pomade. I recognized him. Caleb Vance, son of the real estate mogul Richard Vance. Marcus Monroe's biggest business rival, or so everyone thought. But here his image was nestled close to Ava's, like a pair of lovers. Of course, they weren't rivals at all. The two families had been in bed together all along, working as partners to set this trap for me. And Ava was the perfect willing bait. I stared at the two faces formed of black smoke, feeling no anger, just an icy calm, the same state of mind I enter when I grind ink before starting a new piece. The more intricate the work, the quieter your heart and steadier your hand must be. Understand, I said, standing up. Tonight, I need a visitor at the Vance estate. I want to know exactly what they're after. As I spoke, a figure in the corner dressed in worn clothes stirred and rose without a sound. It was the effigy of a newsboy, still clutching a stack of yellowed papers. It bowed to me, then flickered like a plume of smoke and slipped through the crack under the door, vanishing into the night. I walked over to the tragedy inn and dipped a finger into the melted cream. I brought it to my nose. The strange, clinical scent was unmistakable. I could even identify some of the key ingredients: nightshade, oleander, and mandrake root, all of them insidious. You want to turn me into a puppet? I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I wiped the cream from my finger onto the tragedian's lips. The crimson smear instantly became brighter, more vivid, more grotesque. Let's see who really loses their mind first. I slept soundly that night. I knew my children would bring back everything I needed to know. The next morning, I opened a shop as usual. The Newsboy Sentinel was back in its corner, dusted with the morning dew. Tucked under its arm was something new. A private ledger. Caleb Vance's secret ledger. I opened it. The very first page recorded a massive wire transfer. The recipient was a Dr. Alistair Wallace, and the memo for the payment was just 2 words: compound refinement. I tucked the ledger away in the most secure hiding spot in the shop, a false panel behind a row of antique memorial urns. Then I began work on a new sentinel. A woman. She wore a fashionable dress, her hair sculpted into glamorous waves. Her face was a near-perfect replica of Ava's, about 70% identical. The other 30% I left blank. I worked slowly, meticulously. Every piece of the frame was bamboo, soaked in rice starch for maximum flexibility. For the skin, I used the finest vellum paper, thin as a cicada's wing, yet incredibly resilient. I even used a drop of my own blood, mixed with crimson ink, to paint her lips. The moment the blood touched the paper, I felt a faint, tingling sensation at my fingertip, as if it were being drawn out. This sentinel would be a mirror, a gift for Ava. The days that followed were routine. I opened the shop, I crafted, I closed the shop. Ava continued to visit, bringing an assortment of pastries and drinks. Each time, the strange, chemical odor on her grew a little stronger. I knew the poison was almost ready. Her gaze became more and more like she was looking at a dead man, her pity mixed with an impatient, hungry greed. I accepted everything she brought. I'd eat and drink it all in front of her. Then, as soon as she left, I'd go to the back and vomit it all up, using the poison remnants to water the plants. Within 3 days, my most prized orchids in the courtyard were all dead. Their roots had rotted away. Ava knew nothing. She was convinced I was completely under her spell. She started to mention Caleb Vance, dropping his name casually into our conversations. Ethan, Caleb Vance, just got back from a business trip overseas. He's bringing a lot of new capital into the city. The market is about to be shaken up. My father says the Vance Corporation is stronger than ever. The Monroes might need to rely on their support in the future. She watched my face for any reaction as she spoke. I was working on a memorial horse, my head down. I don't really follow the world of business. My voice was flat, disinterested. She seemed pleased with my apathy. That's for the best. All you need to do is look after this little shop. Her hand rested on my shoulder. Through the fabric of my shirt, I could feel its coldness. It felt like a snake. I didn't pull away. I even turned and smiled at her. Of course, I'll keep the shop safe, waiting for you to be my bride. My compliance seemed to dissolve her last shred of caution. She began staying out all night. The first time, she called and said she was having too much fun at a friend's house and wouldn't be coming home. I said, okay. As soon as I hung up, I released the sentinel I had made in her image. Dressed in a dress identical to the one my fiancé had worn that day, it slipped silently into the night. Its mission was simple: find Ava and stick to her like a shadow. The next day, the sentinel returned. It brought back a new scent, a strong, cheap cologne, the kind Caleb Vance wore. It also brought back images. The sentinels of my house can see, hear, and smell. Everything they experience is transmitted back to me through a unique connection we share. My mind became a silent, black and white movie screen. The scene was a sleek, minimalist suite at the Sterling Grand. Ava and Caleb were tangled together, falling onto the plush king-size bed. Caleb's wire-rimmed glasses were on the nightstand, a smug grin on his face. Ava, darling, you're sure that throwback living in his creepy dollhouse doesn't suspect a thing? Him? He's a relic who spends all day talking to his creations. What could he possibly know? Ava's voice was a mix of flirtation and contempt. He's wrapped around my finger. He believes every word I say. Excellent. Once we get our hands on the Cole family's charter, this entire city will be ours for the taking. And how will you reward me for my part in all this? When I'm the king of Port Sterling, you'll be my queen. The rest of the film was R-rated. I watched it all with a blank expression. So, they were after the charter. The Cole family did indeed possess a special charter, passed down through generations. But it wasn't a deed to any earthly property. It was a pact, a contract signed with the couriers of the underworld. It's this charter that allows the sentinels of my house to walk between the realms of the living and the dead, unimpeded. That is the true secret, the true power of the Sentinel House and my family. And these fools thought it was a treasure map. Idiots. Once I had the information I needed, I broke the connection. In the shop, the sentinel in the stylish dress stood quietly in the corner. The 30% of its face I had left blank was now complete. A chilling smile was etched onto its lips, its eyes hollow yet filled with an endless, seething resentment. It had become Ava's ethereal twin, her proxy in the shadow world. It had absorbed her scent, her essence, and now, her karma. From that day on, Ava started having nightmares. She told me she kept dreaming of a woman who looked exactly like her, standing by her bed, staring down at her in the dark. The woman would whisper, "Why are you trying to steal my man?" I listened patiently, handing her a cup of warm tea. "It's just a dream, Ava. Don't be afraid." I comforted her in a soft voice. She squeezed my hand. Hers was ice-cold and trembling. She had no idea. It wasn't a dream. Every night, as I slept, the sentinel would go to her bedside and stand there, watching until dawn. The mirror was beginning to reflect the terror in her own heart. And this was only the beginning. Ava's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She developed dark circles under her eyes and lost weight. The gardenia perfume vanished completely, replaced by the ever-stronger smells of the chemical compound and her own fear. She grew paranoid, constantly feeling as though someone was watching her. Caleb seemed to notice the change in her. He stopped taking her to hotels and instead brought her to a new, private clinic. The doctor in charge was the same Dr. Wallace from the Ledger. My newsboy Sentinel had already scoped the place out. On the surface, it was a respectable medical facility. In reality, it was a front for the Vance family's dirty work, a place to deal with inconvenient people. For example, if a business rival refused to cooperate, they might find themselves with a diagnosis of acute psychosis and quietly shipped off to a long-term care facility. Their assets, of course, would then be absorbed by the Vance Corporation. Now, they were planning to use the same tactic on me. In Dr. Wallace's office, Ava tearfully described her nightmares, her nightly visitations from a ghost in a designer dress. Dr. Wallace listened with a grave expression, then told her she was experiencing hallucinations brought on by extreme stress. Then, he smoothly pivoted the conversation. "Miss Monroe, your fiancé, Mr. Cole, he's in a rather unique profession, isn't he?" "Yes, he makes memorial figures." "Ah, that would explain it." Prolonged engagement with such morbid arts can take a toll on one's mental stability. I suspect Mr. Cole may be exhibiting early signs of schizophrenia. Your hallucinations could very well be a projection of his negative energies affecting you. Dr. Wallace's pseudoscientific explanation was flawless. Ava nodded, completely convinced. Caleb, standing by, added fuel to the fire. "See, Ava, I told you that guy gave off a bad vibe. For your own safety, we have to do something, and fast." This something had already been prepared. Dr. Wallace pulled a blank diagnostic form from his desk drawer. "If you can convince Mr. Cole to come in for an examination, I can almost certainly confirm a diagnosis. At that point, for the safety of the community, we can have him involuntarily committed for treatment." It was my death warrant already signed. The moment I stepped into that clinic, no matter how sane I acted, I would walk out with a one-way ticket to a padded cell. I watched all of this unfold through my sentinel's eyes. I saw the look of dawning realization, then relief, on Ava's face. She even spoke up. Dr. Wallace Ethan is stubborn. He doesn't trust modern medicine. Is there a way to make him come for an evaluation voluntarily? That would depend on Mr. Vance's resourcefulness, the doctor said, glancing at Caleb. Caleb grinned. That's the easy part. We just need to give him a little trouble. The trouble arrived the next day. A group of thugs stormed into my shop. The leader was a notorious local heavy named Rhino. They started smashing everything in sight, sweeping the figures from my shelves onto the floor. Cole, Rhino yelled, slamming a machete down on my workbench. Heard this place has bad mojo, and it's been giving my boss a headache. You're going to pay up, or you're coming with us for a little chat. My neighbors on the old street peeked out their windows, but didn't dare intervene. I was sitting in my armchair, a carving knife in hand, putting the finishing touches on the eyes of a new figure, the magistrate. I didn't even look up. Get out, I said calmly. Rhino was stunned for a second. Then his face contorted in rage. You got a death wish, pal? He raised the machete and brought it down toward my head. Just as the blade was about to connect, boom, the heavy front door of the shop slammed shut, as if kicked by an invisible giant. The bright daylight was instantly cut off, plunging the shop into shadow. One by one, the shutters on the windows slammed down. Clang! Clang! The shop was now pitch black. The only light came from the magistrate figure in my hands. The eyes I had just carved began to glow with 2 points of eerie, red light. The thugs panicked. What the hell? Is this place haunted? Open the door. Get us out of here. No one answered them. Only a cold, damp wind that snaked around their necks. And a rustling sound. SSSSK. SSSSK. It was the sound of the figures they had knocked over, pulling themselves back up from the floor. Arg! A blood-curdling scream tore through the darkness. It was Rhino. He felt something cold and smooth wrap around his ankle. He looked down. By the red glow from the magistrate's eyes, he saw a sentinel dressed in a burial suit. Its lips, painted crimson, were stretched into a wide, silent grin. Its paper hands were gripping his leg with impossible strength. Ghosts! The thugs lost their minds, crashing into each other in the dark, screaming and crying for their mothers. They tried to run, but the sentinels had already blocked all the exits. I rose from my chair, holding the magistrate. The red light illuminated my face and the silent, orderly army of figures standing behind me. Men, women, old, young, all different, but with one thing in common. Their faces were blank, dead white, and utterly devoid of expression. I walked up to Rhino. He had collapsed to the floor in a heap, a dark stain spreading across the front of his pants. Who sent you? I asked, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. It was Mr. Vance. Caleb Vance. Rhino stammered, shaking uncontrollably. He paid us to trash your shop, rough you up bad, and then have you taken a doctor. Wallace's clinic. Excellent. I nodded. Since you've come all this way, you should leave with a souvenir. I held the magistrate out in front of his face. Look into its eyes. Terrified, Rhino lifted his head and met the 2 glowing red orbs. In the next second, his pupils dilated and his body went rigid, as if his soul had been ripped out. Half an hour later, the doors of the Sentinel house creaked open again. Rhino and his crew stumbled out like zombies, their faces vacant. They weren't physically harmed, but their minds were gone. They just smiled vacantly at anyone who looked at them. When asked what happened inside, they would only repeat one phrase over and over. So many people, in a board meeting. The story spread through Port Sterling like wildfire. Everyone now said that Ethan Cole's shop was a haunted house. The first phase of Caleb and Ava's plan had failed spectacularly, and they'd given me some free advertising in the process. I imagine they must be quite stressed out right now, because soon I'd be paying them a visit, just as they'd hoped. Not at the clinic. In their dreams. After Rhino's crew went insane, the rumors about the Sentinel house changed overnight. Before, they laughed at me for being a poor artisan. Now, they were terrified of me. No one dared to even walk on my side of the street. The utility man just taped my water bill to the door and ran. Peace and quiet. I liked it. I repaired the memorial horse that Rhino had damaged, carefully repainting its eyes. Now, everything was in place. All I needed was the right occasion. A stage. And what better stage than a wedding? I picked up the phone and dialed the Monroe residence. Ava answered. Her voice was thin, exhausted, and laced with an anxiety she couldn't hide. Ethan, it's me. Ava, our wedding date is getting close, isn't it? My voice was calm, almost cheerful. There was a long silence on the other end. I could picture her expression, shock, confusion. Their plan to have me beaten and committed had backfired, and now the intended victim was eagerly bringing up the wedding. It completely threw off their script. Yes, it's soon, she finally stammered. Then let's do it, I said, as if discussing the weather. Exactly 49 days from when we set the date. Not a day sooner, not a day later. You said you wanted to have it at the Sterling Grand Ballroom, right? Let's book it. I'll handle the invitations. Ethan, she seemed to be struggling for words. What is it? I chuckled softly. I just can't wait to make you my wife. Or, are you having second thoughts? No, I can't wait either. She finally choked out the words. I knew she would agree. They had no other choice. The poison was ready. The fraudulent diagnosis was waiting. The wedding was their last and best chance to see their plan through. In a public venue, surrounded by the city's elite, they would make me have an episode. Dr. Wallace would swoop in to save the day, and I'd be quietly escorted away for good. It was a perfect plan. Then it's settled. I'll have the invitations sent over when they're ready. I hung up, putting down the receiver. I turned to face the silent occupants of my shop. They stood and sat in their designated spots, a silent, unmoving congregation. But to me, they were alive. They were my most loyal soldiers, my truest family. Everyone, I announced, my voice filling the large, quiet space. We have a celebration to prepare for. As the words left my lips, there was a sound like a sudden gust of wind. The entire assembly of sentinels, in perfect unison, bowed at the waist. The rustling of 1,000 paper bodies sounded like a tidal wave. I walked to the magistrate figure. The red glow in its eyes was gone, but an aura of immense authority still emanated from it. I took a calligraphy brush from its hand. This was no ordinary brush. The handle was ebonwood, the bristles a mix of coyote tail fur, and 3 hairs from a man who died unjustly. The words it wrote were visible to both gods and ghosts. I laid out a large sheet of crimson paper, flecked with gold leaf. I dipped the brush in ink. This was no ordinary ink, either. It was a mixture I'd prepared myself. Soot from the bottom of a cauldron, the blood of a black dog, and 3 drops of my own blood, drawn from over my heart. An invitation written with this ink was more than a request. It was a summons. Anyone who accepted it was signing a contract between this world and the next. A contract with my family. There was no backing out. I began to write. The first invitation was for Marcus Monroe. The second, for Richard Vance. The third, for Caleb Vance. The fourth, for Dr. Alistair Wallace. I went down the list, writing out a summons for every person involved in the plot. With each name I wrote, I felt a cold, pulling sensation from the tip of the brush, as if I were tugging on the person's very soul and binding it to the paper. When I got to the last one, I paused. Then, I wrote Ava Monroe's name. As the ink settled, it bled slightly like a single, dark tear. Once the invitations were done, I sealed them in matching crimson envelopes. I summoned the newsboy sentinel. Take these, I instructed. Deliver them personally into the hands of each recipient. Make sure they are the ones to accept it. The newsboy nodded, took the stack of blood-red envelopes, and melted back into the shadows. With that finished, a wave of fatigue washed over me. Dealing with the other side was draining. I went to the courtyard and sank into my lounge chair, intending to rest. Just as I closed my eyes, a voice whispered next to my ear. It was the tragedian. Master, are you truly going to marry that woman? Its voice was tinged with a strange, mournful jealousy. She poisoned you, betrayed you, tried to destroy you. A woman like that deserves to have her soul shattered. I didn't open my eyes. Shattering her soul would be a mercy. I murmured, I want her to live. I want her to be wide awake as she watches everything she values turn to ash. I want her to remember for the rest of her days that there are some things you do not touch and some people you do not cross. Silence returned to the shop, broken only by the soft, rustling sound of the paper lanterns swaying under the eaves. It was the perfect, gentle accompaniment for my final thought. Besides my bride, a small smile touched my lips. Who said it was going to be her? On my workbench, the sentinel that looked exactly like my fiancée, now dressed in a magnificent red wedding gown, was smiling back at me. A smile both beautiful and deeply, deeply wrong. The day after the invitations were delivered, Caleb Vance started having nightmares. At first, they were mundane, stressed dreams about business deals or arguments with Ava. But soon, they took a dark turn. He dreamed he was walking down an endless, empty street in the old harbor district. White lanterns hung from every shop front. The street was deserted, the only movement the wind blowing discarded paper money across the cobblestones. He tried to run, but his feet felt like they were encased in lead. Then he'd hear it, the sound of a little girl giggling behind him, a sound both innocent and deeply sinister. When he turned, he'd see her, a little girl in a red dress, her hair in two high pigtails, playing hopscotch a few feet away, smiling at him. The little girl's face was made of paper. Caleb would wake from these dreams drenched in a cold sweat. He told Dr. Wallace about them, who prescribed him sleeping pills and dismissed it as work-related anxiety. He took the pills, but the nightmares only got worse. He started dreaming that the paper girl was in his bedroom. She would just stand by his bed, staring at him all night with her dark, hollow, pupilless eyes. He'd try to scream, but no sound would come out. He'd try to move, but his body would be paralyzed, pinned to the bed. All he could do was watch as the paper monstrosity crept closer and closer, so close he could smell the cloying scent of paper pulp and ink. Caleb was on the verge of a breakdown. He stopped sleeping, leaving all the lights on and drinking himself into a stupor just to get through the night. Within a week, he looked like a ghost. His expensive glasses couldn't hide the dark circles and bloodshot veins in his eyes. Ava saw his decline and was terrified. Her own nightmares hadn't stopped, and now Caleb was unraveling. She felt, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Ethan Cole was behind it all. That quiet, unnerving artisan in his haunted, crumbling shop. Caleb, maybe we should put the plan on hold for a while, she asked tentatively. Hold? How can we hold? Caleb leaped up as if he'd been electrocuted, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her violently. We're past a point of no return. We accepted the invitations. Everyone in Port Sterling knows we're attending that freak's wedding. If we back out now, both our families will be laughingstocks. He was hysterical, his eyes wild and bloodshot. It has to be him. That damn Cole is doing this. He must know some kind of black magic. Ava, you have to go see him, get something out of him. Or better yet, just give him the damn poison ahead of schedule. Ava was frightened by his frantic state. She remembered the moment I'd fed her cake to the effigy and shuddered. Use the poison now? She didn't dare. She had the unshakable feeling that my eyes were on her at all times. Just as Caleb was reaching his breaking point, the nightmares escalated. One night, he drank himself into oblivion and passed out on his sofa. He dreamed of the old street again. But this time, the little paper girl wasn't smiling. She was holding someone's hand. A woman in a soaking wet cocktail dress, her hair plastered to her face, her skin a bluish purple, her eyes rolled back in her head. When Caleb saw the woman's face, his soul nearly left his body. It was Luna Reyes, his mistress from 3 years ago, a dancer at a downtown club. She had gotten pregnant and tried to use the baby to force him to marry her. In a fit of rage, he had pushed her off a pier into the Sterling River. He made it look like an accident, a tragic misstep. Everyone believed it, but now she was back, led from the bottom of the river by a little paper girl. Caleb, where's my baby? The ghost of Luna Reyes moaned. Her voice was watery and garbled, punctuated by gurgling sounds. Give me back my child. She began to float toward him. With every step, she left a trail of wet, muddy footprints mixed with river weeds. The pungent stench of stagnant water filled Caleb's nostrils. He tried to run, but his limbs were frozen. No, it wasn't me. I didn't kill you, he screamed to the dream. Really, the ghost was now hovering right in front of him, her face inches from his. He could see her bloated skin, see the tiny worms wriggling in her eye sockets. Then why did you tie a block of concrete to my legs and sink my body in the deepest part of the channel? Caleb completely shattered. That was a detail only he knew. This thing in front of him. It was real. A scream that was barely human tore from his throat as he bolted upright on the sofa. The room was brightly lit. There was no old street, no paper girl, and certainly no ghost. It was just a dream. He gasped for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. Thank God it was just a dream. He reached for the glass of whiskey on the coffee table, needing another drink to calm his nerves. But when his hand touched the polished wood surface, he felt something cold and wet. He looked down. His pupils shrank to pinpricks. There, on his expensive mahogany coffee table, was a set of small, wet footprints trailing mud and river weeds. They led from the open balcony door directly to the spot where he was sitting, and the sickening, pungent stench of river water hung heavy in the air. Caleb Vance snapped, a complete psychotic break. The next morning, he ran out of his mansion barefoot and in his pajamas. He sprinted through the streets of Port Sterling, falling to his knees and slamming his head on the pavement in front of strangers, screaming, "I'm sorry, Luna. I'm a monster. I killed you. I killed our baby." The Vance family spent a fortune on damage control and had him committed. The official story was that he'd suffered a breakdown due to business pressures. But Caleb's public confession spread through the city like a plague. The Port Sterling PD reopened the 3-year-old case of the dancer who had accidentally drowned. Overnight, the Vance family went from pillars of the community to pariahs. Their company stock plummeted. Business partners cut ties. Richard Vance was left scrambling to salvage his empire, but there was nothing he could do. His heir was now a certified lunatic who spent his days huddled in a corner, screaming at shadows to leave him alone. I watched this all unfold as if from a great distance. I kept my shop open, business as usual. The only change was that the Newsboy Sentinel now held a copy of the day's paper. The front page featured a large, dramatic photo of Caleb on his knees, his face a mask of terror. I carefully cut out the article and pasted it to the wall behind my counter. It joined several others, all detailing the recent misfortunes of the Vance family. When Ava came to see me, her face was paler than the newsprint on the wall. "Ethan, Caleb," she couldn't finish the sentence. Her eyes were wide with a terror that was personal and profound. She looked at me as if I were some kind of monster. "I know. It was all over the news," I said, not looking up from the gold leaf I was applying to a new figure. My tone was as casual as if I were discussing the weather. Such a shame, a promising young man, to lose his mind like that. "It was you. It has to be you." Ava finally shrieked, her control shattering. Her body was trembling, the finger she pointed at me shaking violently. I put down my brush and turned to face her, my expression placid. "Ava, what are you talking about? I'm just an artisan. What power could I possibly have to drive the heir to the Vance fortune insane?" My face was a picture of innocence, but my eyes were like two deep, dark wells, and she recoiled from my gaze. "It was you. It has to be. What are you?" she screamed, lunging at me, trying to grab the front of my shirt. I didn't move, just as her fingers were about to touch me. Slap. The sharp crack of a palm hitting a cheek echoed through the shop. But I hadn't moved. The one who slapped her was a woman who had appeared from nowhere, standing directly behind her. A woman wearing the exact same designer dress, with the same wavy hair, and a face contorted with the same expression of fear and rage. It was as if Ava had slapped herself. She clutched her cheek, staring in disbelief at her perfect double. Who are you?" The other Ava didn't answer. She just stared back with an expression of pure, venomous hatred. Then, her lips curled into a grotesque smile. "I'm you," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of Ava's. "You're the one who tried to steal my man. You're the one who tried to have him killed. And now, you're getting what you deserve." This sudden apparition was, of course, the sentinel I had crafted. After absorbing enough of Ava's fear and essence, it could now manifest for short periods, even perfectly mimicking her voice and mannerisms. Sometimes, to fight a monster, you have to become a demon. "No, you're not me. You're a ghost. A ghost." Ava completely broke down. Staring at her own face twisted in a malevolent grin, she let out a piercing scream and turned to flee. In her haste, she tripped over the threshold and fell hard onto the cobblestones. When she scrambled away, a small, dark puddle remained on the ground. She had wet herself. The sentinel Ava watched her pathetic retreat and let out a low, chilling laugh. Then it turned to me and bowed gracefully. Its form shimmered, faded, and collapsed into a single, thin sheet of paper that fluttered to the floor. I walked over and picked it up. On it was the image of a woman in a red wedding dress. Her face wore a look of deep satisfaction. I carefully folded the paper and put it in my breast pocket. I knew Ava's psychological defenses had been utterly demolished. She would run to her father, to Dr. Wallace, and tell them my shop was haunted, that I was something inhuman. And would that cunning old fox Marcus Monroe believe her? Not a chance. He would simply conclude that his daughter, like Caleb Vance, had lost her mind. And a daughter who had lost her mind was of no use to him at all. This drama was getting more and more interesting. Revenge is like crafting a sentinel. You must be patient, building it layer by layer. You must let your target dangle on the precipice between sanity and madness, torturing them until they, of their own free will, step into hell. Just as I predicted, Ava ran home and told her father everything. She was hysterical, raving about dark magic, about a paper double of herself that had slapped her in my shop. Marcus Monroe listened, his face growing darker with every word. When she was finished, he didn't comfort her. He raised his hand and struck her across the face. Nonsense. I think you've gone mad, just like Caleb Vance. He had her locked in her room, forbidden from leaving. In his cold, calculating world, a daughter who was no longer useful and potentially insane was nothing but a liability. The only thing he cared about now was the upcoming wedding. It was his last chance to get his hands on the Cole family's charter. He wouldn't let anything jeopardize that. He sent word to Dr. Wallace to expedite his work. The poison, the final compound, was at last complete. It was colorless, odorless, and tasteless. Mixed into a glass of champagne, not even an expert could detect it. The plan was simple. I would drink the toast at the wedding, and within 10 minutes, the neurotoxin would take hold. Dr. Wallace would then rush in to treat me, administer a powerful sedative, and I would be carted away by his paramedics, never to be seen in Port Sterling again. Their plan was perfect, except they were dealing with something far beyond their comprehension. The invitations, the summons, had all been delivered. Marcus Monroe, Richard Vance, Dr. Wallace, every one of them had personally accepted the crimson envelopes from my newsboy, and every one of them felt that the heavy, gold-flecked paper was unnaturally cold to the touch. The names, written in my special ink, seemed to radiate a chilling energy that made the hair on their arms stand up. But they couldn't refuse to attend. The wedding was the social event of the season. To be a no-show would be a public humiliation. They rationalized their unease as a simple fear of my strange, haunted shop. They told themselves that once the wedding was over and their plan succeeded, the problem of Ethan Cole would be gone forever. The day before the wedding, I sent the newsboy out one more time, not to deliver something, but to retrieve it. It returned with a magnificent red wedding gown. It was the one the Monroes had custom-made for Ava, hand-embroidered and adorned with pearls. I dressed the sentinel bride in it. Clothes make the man, and they make the effigy, too. In the gown, the sentinel looked almost alive. It sat silently at the vanity, its exquisite but lifeless face reflected in the antique mirror. I also constructed a traditional palanquin painted bright red. 8 sentinel bearers in matching red uniforms stood silently beside it. Everything was ready. On the wedding day, long before sunrise, the sentinel house was decorated with red lanterns and symbols of celebration. But in the morning mist, the lanterns cast an eerie, unsettling glow. The crimson symbols looked less like celebratory art and more like splashes of blood. I hired no musicians. The old street was unnervingly silent, the only sound the mournful sigh of the wind. The procession began on time. 8 paper figures, carrying a paper palanquin, moved without a sound through the streets of Port Sterling. Pedestrians saw the bizarre entourage and gave it a wide berth, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. It looked less like a wedding procession and more like a funeral cortege. The palanquin stopped at the gates of the Monroe estate. The place was buzzing with activity, a playground for the city's elite. Marcus Monroe, in a brand-new tailored suit, greeted his guests with a beaming smile, as if his locked-up daughter and his insane business partner didn't exist. His eyes were fixed on the prize, my family's charter. When he saw my procession, his smile froze. 8 expressionless bearers and a paper palanquin. This wasn't the arrival of a son-in-law. This looked like an escort from the underworld. "Ethan, what is the meaning of this?" Marcus hissed, his voice low and angry. I stepped out from behind the palanquin, dressed in a formal, high-collared red tunic. My face bore a pleasant, placid smile. "Father-in-law, the auspicious hour has arrived. I've come to collect Ava." My gaze drifted past him, toward the grand house. "Is the bride not ready?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. He knew I was publicly shaming him, but with all his guests watching, he was trapped. He forced a smile that was more like a grimace. "Ready, of course she's ready. Men, bring the bride to the palanquin." 2 household servants practically dragged Ava down the stairs. She was also in a red gown, her face hidden by a veil. Her entire body was shaking uncontrollably. From beneath the veil came a series of muffled, choked sobs. I watched impassively as she was half pushed, half shoved into the paper palanquin. As the curtain fell, I saw her hand, thin and skeletal, clawing at the doorframe. The palanquin was lifted. It proceeded slowly toward the sterling grand ballroom, with Marcus Monroe and his guests following in their fleet of luxury cars. No one noticed as the procession rounded a corner. A gust of wind blew the curtain open for a brief second. Inside, sitting beside the trembling Ava, was another figure in an identical wedding gown. This other bride was grinning, a wide, silent smile aimed at the outside world. Its hand rested gently on Ava's shoulder. A muffled, blood-curdling scream erupted from within the palanquin, but it was quickly lost in the noise of the city traffic. The Sterling Grand Ballroom was the most opulent venue in the city. A soaring, vaulted ceiling, massive crystal chandeliers, and a red carpet so plush it reflected the light. Today, Marcus Monroe had rented it for his daughter's wedding, and for my funeral. The hall was filled with the who's who of Port Sterling. They mingled, sipped champagne, and traded pleasantries, but a palpable tension hung in the air. This whole affair felt wrong. The groom's paper entourage, the bride being forced in her ride. Everyone felt like they were attending a trap, not a celebration. I stood with Marcus at the entrance, greeting the arrivals. He was the picture of a proud father. I was the calm, happy groom. We were 2 actors playing our parts, each of us knowing the other was hiding a knife behind his back. Dr. Wallace arrived, dressed in a crisp tuxedo and carrying a black leather medical bag. He nodded at me, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of pity and scientific curiosity. The look of a man about to dissect a particularly interesting specimen. I knew his bag held the poison and the sedatives. The time came. The wedding march began to play. The master of ceremonies announced in a booming voice, "Let us welcome the groom and his beautiful bride." The grand doors swung open. I walked down the aisle, alone. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Where was the bride? Marcus was equally stunned. He rushed to my side. "Ava, where's the palanquin?" "Patience, father-in-law," I said with a smile that made him shiver. "The bride will be here shortly." As I spoke, every light in the ballroom went out. Click! The magnificent chandeliers died, plunging the hall into absolute, suffocating darkness. Gasps and shouts erupted from the guests. "What happened? Is it a power outage? Get the lights back on." No one answered. A cold, unnatural wind began to blow through the enclosed space, rustling tablecloths and sending dresses flying. Then a new sound began. Not the wedding march. It was a haunting, sorrowful melody of a tragic opera, sung by a single female voice. The song was filled with such despair it seemed to rise from the ground itself, seeping into everyone's bones. The panic grew. Someone fumbled with a lighter. Click! A small flame flickered to life, illuminating the table nearest to him. The man holding the lighter let out a scream like a slaughtered pig. "Ah, ghosts!" The lighter fell from his hand, but in the final second before it went out, everyone saw it. The guests at that table had changed. Their faces were chalk white and rigid. Their eyes were black, empty holes. Their lips were lines of painted crimson. Their skin was made of paper. Click! The lights came on again. Not the warm glow of the chandeliers, but the cold, pale light of a ring of white lanterns that had appeared on the walls. Each lantern was marked with a single, stark black word. Mourn. In a ghastly light, the guests looked around and saw the truth. They were no longer surrounded by their peers. The seats were now filled with row after row of silent, motionless effigies, paper figures in fine clothes, all sitting perfectly upright, all staring at the stage. The handful of real people were trapped, surrounded by an army of the dead. What? What is going on? A socialite whimpered, collapsing into her husband's arms. Marcus and Dr. Wallace were paralyzed with shock, staring at the silent, paper congregation. Please, don't be alarmed. I stood at the center of the stage, my voice calm as I addressed the terrified flock. They're my invited guests. A wedding should be a lively affair, don't you think? Just then, the ballroom doors creaked open again. The 8 sentinel-bearers carried the red palanquin inside, their movements utterly silent, as if they were floating. They set it down at the end of the aisle. The curtain parted on its own. Inside sat 2 brides in identical red gowns. One was the real Ava, pale and shaking with terror. The other was the sentinel, its face fixed in a wide, grotesque smile. When the guests saw the 2 identical brides, the air in the ballroom seemed to solidify. Fear was a physical presence, a hand closing around every throat. They stared at the paper bride, its smile radiating a pure, malevolent energy in the spectral light. Cole, what in God's name are you doing? Marcus Monroe finally found his voice, pointing a trembling finger at me. I'm not doing anything, I said, descending the stage and walking slowly, deliberately, toward the palanquin. My footsteps echoed in the dead silence. I'm simply trying to get married. I stopped in front of the palanquin. The real Ava looked at me, her eyes a mix of desperate hope and mortal terror. She reached for me. Ethan, help me. It's going to kill me. Beside her, the sentinel bride turned its head to look at me. Its painted smile widened. It slowly raised its paper hand and caressed Ava's cheek. Ava screamed as if she'd been stung by a wasp and scrambled to the back of the small space. You see, I said, turning to face Marcus Monroe with a playful smirk. She seems a bit reluctant. In that case, I suppose we'll have to switch brides. I reached in and took the sentinel bride's hand. Its body was weightless, its paper skin cold and stiff. I led it to the center of the stage. Below us, the few human guests huddled together, utterly broken. And the hundreds of paper guests all rose to their feet as one. They turned in unison, their hollow eyes, like 1,000 tiny abysses, fixing upon the living. This is impossible. Were you, man or demon? Dr. Wallace stammered, having fallen to the floor. His medical bag had spilled open, its syringes and vials rolling across the carpet. His precious science and logic had been shattered by the impossible scene before him. I am both, I said, looking down at him. To my friends, I am a man. To my enemies, I am the demon that crawls up from hell to collect on their debts. My gaze finally settled on Marcus Monroe. Mr. Monroe, you made a deal with my family, and then you tried to cheat. That is very poor business etiquette. I patted the hand of my paper bride. You wanted the charter so badly. It's right here. But are you worthy of taking it? Marcus's face was a mottled purple and white. He knew, now, that he had not just provoked a rival. He had awakened something ancient and terrible. He tried to run, but as he turned, he saw that 2 massive, imposing figures now blocked the ballroom doors. 2 sentinel generals, one with a fierce green face, the other with a great red beard, stood guard with paper swords and spears. They radiated an aura of deadly intent. Every escape route was sealed. They were rats in a trap. Cornered, Marcus found a last reserve of bluster. Don't get cocky, Cole. So you know a few cheap tricks? This is Port Sterling. There are laws. If you harm us, the police will hunt you down. Laws? I laughed as if it were the funniest joke I'd ever heard. In the Sentinel House, I am the law. I snapped my fingers. The tragedian sentinel materialized on stage, floating out of the shadows. It began to sing again, its voice high and piercing. But this time, it wasn't a song of sorrow. It was a recital of crimes. Marcus Monroe, president of the Commerce Board, for plotting to steal the Cole family inheritance and conspiring to poison his son-in-law, his first sin. Richard Vance, real estate magnate, for collusion in a scheme of theft and murder, his second sin. Dr. Alistair Wallace, for aiding and abetting evil and holding human life in contempt, his third sin. With every crime it named, its voice grew shriller. With every name, the paper guests took one synchronized step forward. The sound of their paper shoes on the carpet was like a drumbeat counting down to an execution. The conspirators finally understood. The moment they had stepped into this ballroom, they had ceased to be the hunters. They had become the prey. By the time the tragedian had sung the final charge, the paper guest had formed a tight, suffocating circle around Marcus and the other living conspirators. They could smell the ink and paper pulp, a scent that now smelled like their own death warrant. "Stay back. Please, stay back." One of the businessmen, a man used to luxury and deference, was now on his knees, sobbing and banging his head on the floor. "This has nothing to do with me. I just came for the wedding. Mr. Cole, please, have mercy." I ignored him. My eyes were locked on Marcus Monroe. Even now, the old fox was trying to maintain a shred of dignity. "You kill us all, and you'll never get away with it. The police will find out. Kill you." I smiled. Why would I do that? I'm a law-abiding citizen. I clapped my hands, and the circle of sentinels halted, a mere foot away from their prisoners. "I merely want to play a game." From inside my tunic, I produced a sheet of yellowed, ancient-looking parchment. It was the very charter they had coveted. "Isn't this what you wanted? Here, it's yours." I gently placed it on the floor in the center of the circle. "Whoever can burn this paper can walk out of here alive today." My voice was a seductive whisper. Their eyes, filled with a desperate mix of greed and a primal will to survive, were glued to the parchment. "Burn it? That's all." A portly man closest to it scrambled forward. "I'll do it. Let me burn it." He pulled out a lighter and flicked it on, holding the flame to the edge of the charter. A strange thing happened. The flame licked at the parchment, but the charter remained untouched, unharmed. It was as if it were made of something not of this world, immune to mortal fire. The man tried again and again, his desperation growing until the lighter ran out of fluid. The charter was pristine. How is this possible?" he whimpered, collapsing in a heap. "Let me." Marcus shoved him aside. He produced a flask of whiskey and poured the entire contents over the charter, then tossed a lit match onto it. Whoosh! A plume of blue flame erupted, burning fiercely for nearly a minute. When it died down, the alcohol-soaked charter lay on the floor without so much as a scorch mark. A collective gasp went through the prisoners. They were finally beginning to understand that this was not something they could ever hope to destroy. This was a contract from another world. "It seems none of you are up to the task," I said, shaking my head with mock disappointment. "Since you can't burn it, I suppose we'll have to let it burn you." As I spoke, the charter on the floor lifted into the air on its own. The ancient, crimson symbols written on it began to glow with a blood-red light. An immense, invisible force, a powerful suction, emanated from it. "AR!" The portly man screamed first. He felt something inside him being violently ripped away. His soul. Before the horrified eyes of the others, a translucent, shimmering image of the man was pulled from the top of his head. The spirit form struggled and twisted in the air before being sucked into the charter with a faint hiss. One of the crimson symbols on the parchment flared brightly. The man's body slumped to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. He wasn't dead. His eyes were open, his chest was still rising and falling. But he was an empty shell, a living corpse. One by one, it was the same for the others. The soul of every person who had plotted against my family was extracted and absorbed by the charter. They were powerless to resist, forced to watch as they were turned into mindless, living statues. Finally, it was Marcus Monroe's turn. Having witnessed the fate of his allies, his composure finally shattered. He fell to his knees before me. "Ethan, I was wrong. For Ava's sake, spare me. I'll give you everything, the entire Monroe fortune. Just please." "Begging now? It's too late," I said, my face a mask of stone. "And you have no right to speak her name." My gaze shifted to the palanquin, where the real Ava lay, having fainted from terror long ago. The red light of the charter enveloped Marcus. His soul was torn from his body. In the final moment before it was consumed, his ethereal face was a portrait of infinite regret and absolute terror. When it was done, the red light faded. The charter floated back into my hand. It felt heavier now, burdened with the dozen corrupt souls it had imprisoned. They would spend eternity within it, tormented by the fires of their own karma. That is the price for breaking a contract between the worlds. Silence reigned in the grand ballroom. On the floor lay more than a dozen soulless bodies. The few remaining, innocent guests huddled in the corner, too terrified to even breathe. What they had seen today would haunt them for the rest of their lives. I walked to the palanquin. The unconscious Ava was being held by the sentinel bride. I lifted her into my arms. She was as light as a feather. The months of torment had withered her away. I carried her through the silent congregation of paper figures and out the main doors. The two sentinel generals bowed as I passed, clearing my path. I didn't look back. I knew that after I left, my sentinels would take care of the rest. By morning, the people of Port Sterling would hear of a tragic, mysterious fire at the Grand Ballroom. More than a dozen of the city's most prominent figures had perished, their bodies burned beyond recognition. And of course, none of it would have anything to do with a humble memorial artisan from the Old Harbor District. I carried Ava back to the Sentinel House and laid her on my own bed. I didn't kill her. I didn't take her soul. As I decided long ago, death was too kind of fate. I brewed a special tea and helped her drink it. It was an antidote for the poison she had taken, but it only neutralized half of its effects. The other half was a compound that would ensure she lived forever in a pleasant, pliable delusion. When she awoke, she didn't recognize me. Not really. She looked at me with a hazy, dreamlike gaze. "Ethan? Are we getting married?" "We are," I said, stroking her hair as one would pet. "The ceremony just ended. You were so beautiful." I held a mirror up to her face. It reflected her pale, gaunt features. But in her mind's eye, she saw a radiant bride, flushed with happiness. From that day on, Ava stayed with me at the Sentinel House. She became my wife. A wife forever trapped on her wedding day, forever in love with me, forever lost in a gentle madness. She would bring me my tea, mend my clothes, and some nights she would wake from a fleeting nightmare, crying that there were ghosts in the house. On those nights, I would place the Sentinel bride beside her. Seeing her identical sister, she would immediately calm down, believing it was there to protect her. She never knew it was the cage that bound her soul to this place, ensuring she would never find peace, never escape. The power structure of Port Sterling was shattered overnight. The Monroe and Vance dynasties and all the families connected to them collapsed. Their empires were swiftly carved up and devoured by others. No one ever investigated the true cause of the fire. Or perhaps no one dared. The Sentinel House remained as it always had, a quiet shop on a forgotten street. But no one ever came to cause trouble again. In fact, some people began to leave offerings at my doorstep in the dead of night, burning incense and praying. They saw me as either a living saint or a walking devil. I didn't care either way. I continued my work, crafting my figures day in and day out. But now my shop had some new prominent employees. The magistrate, the tragedian, the two generals. I placed them in the most visible locations in the shop. A silent declaration to all who entered. This is the Sentinel House. I am Ethan Cole, and I am its master. Man or ghost, god or demon, when you're on my territory, you play by my rules. As for the consequences of breaking those rules, you've already seen them.